So here we have the skull. We're going to go over the cranial bones first. So this one here is the frontal bone. Then you have the parietal bones, which you have one on the right and one on the left. Then in the back, you have this occipital bone right here. On the sides, you have the right and left temporal bones. And then we go to the facial bones right here. The first one that we're going to talk about is the nasal bone, which is this one. Then you have the maxilla, which is the top of where your top teeth are going to be attached to. So that's maxilla. Then on the bottom you should have the mandible, which is not shown here, but we'll show you in a second. Then you have the zygomatic bones, which are the cheekbones. You have one on the right and one on the left. You also have, right behind the nasal bone, you have the lacrimal bone right here. Think of your tear duct. It comes from this place. So lacrimal in Spanish and Latin means tear. So that's where your tears come from, basically. So that's the lacrimal bone. And right behind it, you have the ethmoid bone. So nasal bone, lacrimal bone, and then behind the lacrimal bone, you have the ethmoid bone. Now, inside your nasal cavity, you have a bone called the vomer, which kind of sticks out. That's this one right here. Then, we have this one on the side, you can see is the sphenoid bone. Now, the sphenoid bone, you can see it better from an inferior view of the skull, which is right like this. So this is the sphenoid bone. It has a butterfly shape or a bat shape. It's very important because it makes up the base of the skull. Then here we have the palatine bone, and then we have the palatine process of the maxilla. Now, a process is an extension of a bone away from its surface. So this is a palatine bone. This is an extension of the palatine bone, so we call it the palatine process of the maxilla. Then here we're going to have a little some structures that you have to be mindful of. This is the mastoid process of the temporal bone. Again, a process is an extension of a bone away from the surface. Then you have this styloid process. The styloid process looks like a stylus pen, it's kind of thin and long. So that's the styloid process right here. Then you have this right here is a hole. We have a specific name for it. It's the foramen magnum. Foramen means hole, magnum means big. It's the biggest hole in the skull, so it's called foramen magnum. On the sides of the foramen magnum, you're going to have the occipital condyles. Now, condyles are going to be rounded surfaces that are smooth, and they're there for articulation with other bones. So those are the occipital condyles. Now, the occipital condyles articulate with your first cervical vertebrae, which is the atlas, and makes up the atlanto-occipital joint. You don't have to know this for now, but I'm just giving you a point of reference. And then you have other foramens here. You have the foramen ovale. This one has an oval shape, that's why it's called foramen ovale. And then you have the foramen spinosum. I'm going to show you a few more on the interior view of the skull in a few seconds. But for now, let's just go over this. This is the foramen ovale and the foramen spinosum. Also, let me go back to this view right here. Ow, I got my finger stuck. Okay, this is important. This is the zygomatic arch. Now, the zygomatic arch is made of two processes. You have, this is called the zygomatic process of the temporal bone. Now, the way I think about it, first I think about what bone it's coming from, right? It's coming out of the temporal bone. So we're going to say this is the zygomatic process of the temporal bone because it's coming out of the temporal bone. And this is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone because it's coming out of the zygomatic bone. So the zygomatic arch is the whole thing. So if you have something wrapped around here, it would be called zygomatic arch. But if the professor asks for the processes, you have to name them individually. Again, this is the zygomatic process of the temporal bone, and this is the temporal process of the zygomatic bone. Another foramen that you have to know is the infraorbital foramen. Now the prefix infra means below, orbit means like the eye socket. So this is the eye socket right here, or the orbit of the eye. So infraorbital foramen is going to be below the orbit of the eye. So that's this. And then you have the supraorbital foramen, which is really, really tiny. I really don't know if you can see that, but it's right there. Supra means above, so it's going to be above the orbit of the eye. And so, again, supraorbital foramen, infraorbital foramen. Oh, that's a better one. Yeah, supraorbital foramen right here, and then infraorbital foramen right here. And then let's go to the sutures, of course. You have the coronal suture right here. I think of like when a king puts on a crown, this is where the crown would sit, right there. And then you have the sagittal suture, which divides the two parietal bones into right and left. And then you have the lambdoid suture in the back. The lambdoid suture has a Y shape, because the Greek letter for Y is lambda. So lambdoid suture, that's this one. And then you have a flat suture, which we call the squamous suture, between the parietal bones and the temporal bone. Okay, so this is the squamous suture. Let me see if I missed anything. I think this is it for the outside. We're gonna go into the inside of the skull right now. So let's go over some of the foramen here. So first, we're gonna go over this structure here, which is the Crista Galli. Now the Crista Galli kind of sticks out. It's very pointy and sharp. And this area right here is the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. Now the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone has a bunch of little foramina. Foramen is just one hole. Foramina is multiple holes. So you have a bunch of little holes in here. Those are called the cribriform foramina. Then you have this entire area here that looks like a butterfly or a bat shape. That's going to be the inside of the sphenoid bone. In the middle, you have a structure that's called the sella turcica. Now this structure is important because that's where the pituitary gland sits, and the pituitary gland is a master gland. It controls a lot of bodily functions. Now we have a bunch of foramen here that we're going to talk about. The first one we're going to talk about is the Foramen Spinosum. Where's the thing? Foramen Spinosum is this one right here. And then you have the foramen ovale, which is this oval-shaped one here. Then you have this one. I hope you can see that. It's the foramen rotundum, that one right there. And then this one is the optic canal. So you have it on both sides because you have one for each optic nerve. So why do we have all these holes? You might be asking yourself. Well, these foramen are there for the passageway of nerves and blood vessels. So all of our nerves and blood vessels are going to have to pass through these foramen. Okay, so again, this is the optic canal. Then we have this one here, which is the jugular foramen. So your jugular veins pass through here. Then, okay, that's good. Let me just add a couple more things on this side, because this is a better model for it. You have this right here is the external acoustic meatus right there. This one on the outside is external. If you have one on the outside, you must have one on the inside. So let me show you the internal acoustic meatus. That's going to be this one right here. And then you also have, this one is not very commonly, it is not asked very often, but just in case, these right here are your carotid foramen or carotid canals. And then this one to the side is the lacerum. So carotid canals, which your carotid arteries pass through in veins. And then you have the lacerum right here. And then you have the mandibular fossa. That's this, where the mandible articulates with the other skull bones. That's called the mandibular fossa, right? That's this right there. It forms, when the mandible is attached, it forms the temporal mandibular joint, okay? So mandibular fossa. And then I believe that's it. Oh, this suture right here, which I don't think you can see very well, but there's a suture right there. It's called the intermaxillary suture, and you can see it on this side, but you can also see it here. Right there. And I believe this concludes this video on the skull bones. Thank you. Is it still?